Welcome to another Founder Wisdom podcast. We have Barb Hyman with us today. She's the founder and CEO at Sapia.ai. She's building a fair world through ethical AI. This podcast is presented to you by Top Leads GTM. You can find us out at topleads.agency. It's my outbound agency. If you need help with your go-to-market, we're the best in the market at doing that. So topleads.agency if you're in search of better GTM for your company. Barb, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Well, I'm sitting here in London, spend a lot of time in Northern Hemisphere, and normally I live in Melbourne, Australia. I started this business back in 2018. I come from quite an unusual set of background experiences. I was a lawyer, then I worked in strategy consulting, and then ended up in HR, and really came to this space having been on the user end and seeing broken hiring practices everywhere I looked. That hiring is just plagued with bias, particularly when humans are involved. You know, the greatest algorithm in the world is the one inside our skull, and we're not very good at explaining it. It's boring. You know, applying for a job and filling out forms multiple times is a pretty, disengaging way to connect with people. And it's sort of striking to me the millions of dollars that are spent on employer brand and career sites, but then how shit the experience is to actually apply for a job. And then the absence of data and the reliance on heuristics, where you worked, the school you went to, how well you shake my hand, whether you look me in the eye, all of these qualities that people seem to hold so true as predictive of success, which are clearly not. Research has shown, there had to be a better way. So that's the journey that we've been on since 2018. We work with a lot of smart leaders from large companies who care deeply, not just about saving time and giving time back, but actually as much about the experience that they're offering their candidates and about inclusion. So that's just a little bit of what we do.
Right. And it seems to me that you were into AI before the actual AI boom, right? The actual ChatGPT/OpenAI boom that happened in 2020. What did that look back then? And I'm pretty sure you were one of the first users of the ChatGPT 3 model, right?
Well, we certainly didn't start out with a vision of let's build an AI company. What we had was a very clear understanding of the problem statement. And I still believe today that you've got to start with the problem statement. I don't think there's such a thing as an AI strategy. And so really understanding as a leader what matters for my business, what does the North Star of success look like, and how do we solve for that? And AI can be an enabler like any other tool. We built our own AI infrastructure. So everything that we have is proprietary. Up until very recently, we didn't use any generative AI at all. We used our own algorithms that we built from the bottom up, a fully vertically integrated machine learning infrastructure. We have a proprietary data set that's now 2 billion words. And that was really the fuel for all of our innovation and very much the moat from a business perspective. With Gen AI coming in, we've been able to leverage that both defensively and offensively for our products. So we have now the ability to provide deeper reasoning around why people have been evaluated in the way that they have from a skills and competencies perspective, but also to overlay an agentic capability on top of a data set that allows people to really understand their employee base, their applicant pool, develop development plans, onboarding plans. It's fundamentally rewriting the talent landscape. So that's a pretty exciting place to be. But it's interesting to me how everyone suddenly, it's like the new low fat is wanting to wrap themselves up in this label. There's a lot of misinformation and companies reinventing themselves as AI first. But we are an original AI native company.
Right. And what do you mean by agentic specifically in Sapia's case?
So the key thing about agents, well, firstly, I think agents have been overblown. I think what really matters in the talent space is agency. How do you help candidates and employees have agency to know their skills and then to use that information to guide their own career paths? How do you help the organization to have agency to hire the right person, to onboard that person, to manage that person, to see the talent within your organization. So, I think agents are becoming a little bit like agile, where agile moved from being a verb to a noun, and everyone got very caught up in the concept of agile, but actually lost a lot of agility. And I think people are getting a little bit obsessed about the concept of an agent. And fundamentally, an agent can do something that's fairly minor and sort of, blah, like tell me how many annual leave days I've got or book my annual leave. Like, who cares? How much time is that really going to save me? Or it can do something far more profound, which is, can you help discover people within the organization who've got AI skills? Or find me the people who we've hired who would make great leaders, for a large retail business, so that we can find in a more fair way, in a more efficient way, the leadership pipeline. And the only way you can do that is if you have really good data about, in our case, people. And so the agent is only as good as the data set that sits underneath it. So that's really our sweet spot and our power, is that we have the ability to really deeply understand people's skills and competencies through having a very short chat conversation. And that data set becomes your data set, and you can mine that. So as a client, they're sitting there doing exactly what I just said, asking what we call talent intelligence agent, TIA, to find them certain kind of talent. They're soundboarding with that agent to help them make the right decision. Because when you think about hiring, it's really the intersection of three things. One is, can they do the job? Are they the right person for my team? And are they the right person for the company from a culture perspective? And, that is not an easy decision to make. And it's not a decision that one score can make. You have to really be thoughtful as a leader about what's it going to take to thrive in this environment. Who's the right person for my team? What kind of bench do I have? And so having really a thought partner who's very smart in that they deeply understand the role, they deeply understand every single person who is interviewed, is like game changing as a co-pilot for hiring managers. So that's what our agent can do, amongst other things.
And you mentioned looking in the eye and shaking hands. I understand that's completely outdated, but do you feel that most HR software are not being fair nowadays? Are they not doing the best job possible when it comes to hiring the best performer for my team instead of looking at the common stereotypes?
Well, I think all you need to do is look at metrics like turnover and engagement to know that it's really hard to get it right. And so relying on humans solely as decision makers doesn't work. Bias is a wonderful shortcut to make fast decisions. It's why we rely on those heuristics, and it's why we trust ourselves so much. We have such high conviction, humans, that we're right, that the gut is right. And, I think you've still got to own the decision and make the decision, because you are absolutely better placed than any AI will be, but you've got to have something that challenges that. And that's where the AI can play a role, which is, there is undiscovered talent here that you're not looking at because they didn't go to Yale, or, they don't have the right pedigree of experience. And so that ability to bring both objective intelligence and your own, let's call it, biased set of assumptions or your own judgment is what makes, I think, the right and fairest outcome for hiring and promotion decisions.
Right. Yeah. 80% gut, 20% more analytical, especially if the market is changing at the pace that is changing right now. Your brain needs to constantly readapt, reevaluate, analyze new information. But don't you think that the turnover is high because people actually branch hop a lot nowadays from job to job? And it's just like the name of the game. If you're playing the 9 to 5 game, you just want to go from one company to the other.
Look at all the early turnover, which is people staying in a job for 6 months. So I'll give you an example. Recruiters, if you ask them, what does a great salesperson look like? Many of them will say that there are people with personality, people with like charisma, because you're having to get on a call and sort of really sell yourself, sell the product. People who are really connectors and engaging well with the team around them. Actually, what we saw, because we're a technology that learns through performance data, like sales performance data, like lever data, is actually the true profile of success for sales, at least in this organization, but we see it fairly consistently, is not extroverts, it's introverts. And when you think about that a little bit deeply, you realize that that's because the introvert is highly focused on hitting their number. They're not really worried about Charles's well-being and whether or not we're going to go out to lunch and team kumbaya. They just want to hit their number. And so, we think we know what great looks like, but data doesn't lie. And what we do is we look at the data profile of those you've hired, but more importantly, we look at the data profile of those who've performed. And as long as there's an objective measure of performance, which sales clearly there is, or in roles where time in role, being there 6 months, 9 months, 12 months is a measure of fit, it's very easy to see the patterns of data that truly speak to success. So think of us like a Netflix for hiring. We take that outcome data when we integrate into Workday or SuccessFactors, we integrate in and we take data out. That helps you to see, wow, it's a bit of an epiphany. I didn't realize that the profile of success was so different to what we thought it was. And, that's the opportunity to hold the mirror up to the humans and go, what we thought was success is actually not success. And the data shows us that.
Interesting. Yeah, the introvert stuff is quite interesting. I've been in sales for 10 years, right? And I've hired tons of SDRs, AE, CSM, and so forth. I would say an introverted that sort of learned extroversion, like myself, and someone that is very much on the servant leadership side of things. Because the old way of doing sell and like selling someone, hey, buy this, we have a quick promotion, hurry up. That doesn't work anymore. It's more like listening to your needs and constantly adding value to you. That's how you make a sell nowadays. So I would sort of agree to that. Now, just coming back to my question about current HR solutions, are these solutions biased or are they reflective of how things are? Meaning, I don't know if they discard like a person that went to that doesn't have university education vs one that has university education. Statistically, it's better to hire someone with actual university education, right? Like, and statistically, it's better to hire someone, I don't know, that has work experiences from all over the world. My point and my question is, should we treat things as they are and inject a dose of as they should be, a dose of fairness? Because I think it's pretty helpful for me for a machine to give me the things as they are so I can take a decision. I don't want the machine to give me things as they should be, right? Like that's not going to be useful to my company. It is going to be fair to that person, quote unquote, but as a business owner, I want performance, and that's pretty much all I want.
Yeah, I guess I challenge you on that, Charles. So, only 25% of people in the US go to college. So you're missing out on a lot of talent. And so if you're competing with people who all believe that you need to go to Yale or Harvard, like you're basically increasing the price of that talent. And who's to say that you're not missing out on undiscovered talent? So the more important thing is really think deeply about what drives success. What are you looking for? What are the skills or competencies? And that is often what we don't think deeply enough. If I think about our own organization, what we've learned is that you need to have people who are unbelievably curious, relentless learners, self-critical, have quite a chip on their shoulder, confident, because we're, disrupting the status quo in a lot of different places. So you think about what are the requirements to succeed here? And then you go, okay, well, I'm going to write a job description for that. I'm going to look for that and measure that. Now, relying on the school that you went to and your grades is just, again, a false positive.
Not
you
only
really
that, but
don't
like
have
part
any
of the
evidence
equation.
yeah. Sorry, you go.
Yeah, it's like an algorithm with like a bunch of criterias, right? So that one, I don't know, would be like 1% of the equation, right? But it's still important. It's still factored in the equation. So it was just an example. I do believe that obviously if 50% of your algorithm is based on that, then you're probably mistaken. By the way, I didn't even finish my uni, but I can tell you from all the folks I interviewed on this podcast, like Yale or Harvard, they're very high quality people. They're very smart. Most of them, they lack the grit, right? The chip on the shoulder, because most of them were born into wealth, but it's still a strong indicator of their performance.
Well, I mean, I think there's plenty of research that would say that those are institutions that favor those who've got the advantage resume. So the key thing about bias in AI is the data that you're using. We don't use any CV data. CV data is a really risky data set to use because you're basically making inferences. Why infer whether someone's a good fit as opposed to measure whether or not they've got the right qualities? So a lot of technology tools are based on scraping resumes. I mean, that's like garbage in, garbage out. And I'm kind of dumbstruck how many people, particularly in the US, still attach so much credence to a resume and tools that rely on resumes. So when we're capturing the data, what we're doing is we don't know that you're male, white, anything about you. All we're doing is trying to understand your skills, and we're having an interview conversation. That's the only data that goes into the AI. Now, we also don't use raw data in order to measure your features, is what we call it, because language is very genderized. If you ask me to share a story about what drives my, energy or fills me with energy, it might be very different to you. Maybe you'll share a sporting story. Maybe I'll share a mum story. Who knows? Just to really stereotype. And so if you take those raw examples, you're likely to be embedding bias in that process. We first map the language to the features, and then we do the scoring. So you end up basically minimizing all the differences between gender, ethnicity, cultures from a language perspective when you adopt that approach. Now, the challenge with a lot of buyers of AI tools is they don't look below the surface of just claims. What I think is happening now is a little bit like it's about brand marketing. Whoever spends the most amount of money and gets the most shiny new, impressive influencers attached to their product, people go, well, that thing must work. I'll give you an example. There's a really well-known technology out there that just published its independent AI audit that, boasted about having a 90% pass rate from a fairness perspective and an assessment perspective. What's the point of having a 90% pass rate? If you think about it, if everyone who graduated from university had A's, how would universities, or graduated from school had A's, how would universities decide on who to accept from a grading perspective? It becomes completely null and void. And how do you think about fairness if everyone passes, right? Of course, there's no discrimination. So, HR needs to be more scrutinous and kind of ask first principles question. What does this really mean, this claim? And to look beyond the marketing taglines and really understand what's going on under the hood.
Fully agree with that. Do you think AI and the futuristic approach that you're adopting right now is going to modify and shape the future education system? Like, is that going to fully change? What would it look like in 10 years from now?
I think technology like ours is democratizing opportunity and making things like university education way more redundant. Reality is that the beautiful thing about GPT for humanity is that it's going to level up certainly those who are, not able to access some of the privileged education that maybe we did. And so they can teach themselves really fast. I remember back in the day, a decade ago, someone said to me they taught themselves Excel and modeling using YouTube. I mean, the ability to learn at speed such a broad range of topics is just massively accelerated now with GPT. So why go to university? And so I think tools like us are agnostic to the school that you went to, agnostic to all the demographic information that we normally pay too much attention to. And we're going to see way more diversity of talent happen automatically. I think what we deliver is invisible inclusiveness, without even trying, without having a diversity program, without having to go out there and, claim that you're doing all these things to promote diversity. It's just going to happen naturally through technology like us.
You said when we started today that you weren't too bullish on X, is that some stuff that you've seen as of late that is divisive and that is not productive for humanity? Why aren't you on X anymore active there?
Yeah, so, well, it's interesting that early days when it was called Twitter, one of the, we took 2 years to build the product. We had a thesis that language has a lot of signal about people, that chat would be the form and the medium through which people would engage in the future from a workplace perspective, and we had to experiment. And one of the ways we experimented was we scraped 2 million tweets, which at the time you could, and a lot of people self-declare their Myers-Briggs profile on Twitter, which is not a credible framework to use for selection. But in any case, we wanted to see if there was a relationship between Twitter data and personality data, and we found it was highly correlative and predictive. And we wrote a research paper about it. And what we postured was that you can't use generalized data for a specific use case, because people don't tweet the way they interview for a job, and Twitter is not representative of the whole community. So you're naturally self-selecting in only a certain portion of the population. And so, that led us to strongly believe we needed to create our own data set. You couldn't use third-party data, and particularly generalized language data like that, to perform a task. That's one of the issues, by the way, with a lot of people wrapping a wrap around generative AI or large language models, is that there's no context to the data. You have to have context-specific data. That 2 billion words which we put into Claude to enable us to do this next version of our product is really what's made this safe for companies to use. In terms of posting on X, look, I'm very time poor, so I have to be selective about where I spend my time. And I think what the HR world needs is more thoughtfulness, more depth of discussion, to, ask why multiple times. And so I think short staccato style commentary does not serve the community well, when what we need is much more deeper conversations around how to assess AI, how to use it responsibly, how to bring people along the journey.
So is the 160 character limits the problem, or like the toxicity that was bred onto this platform? What's a better platform for discussion to progress about AI and AI ethics?
Yeah, look, I mean, all of our marketers on LinkedIn, and that is a place where you can engage with people and you can educate. I feel like a big part of my job is education, is helping AI leaders to lean in. And the throwaway line around isn't all AI biased, which is the kind of thing you might see on X, for me doesn't serve the education agenda that we all need to be going on.
And what's a better platform for discussion, like podcasts, for example, conversation with peer groups, like, I don't know, Vistage or YPO or EO, or World Economic Forum? Like, what would be an even better platform to have a thoughtful, educated conversation?
Yeah. Look, I love podcasts. I listen to podcasts a lot. I learn from them because I think the long form podcasts are a great way to really go deeply into a topic. So I'm always up for that. But I think forums where people come together and learn together and share experiences. Today, I was part of a session which was talking about how the whole workplace and hiring is not inclusive of people who are neurodivergent. That in the UK, at least, 53% of Gen Z identify as neurodivergent. And if you don't have a hiring process, i.e. you're using CVs, you're using video, you're using timed assessments, you're going to naturally exclude that community. That's half your talent pool that you've lost just through the way you design your process. And so listening to people who are expert in this area talk about what have they tried, what's worked, teach us, what does it mean to be building a workplace that is really going to make that community thrive. Like, I learned from that, and I think everyone in the room learned from that. There are no quick wins when it comes to people, right? Like, it's when you think about ourselves as human beings, we're all work in progress. We're doing work on ourselves for our whole life. I don't want to be with people who aren't prepared to do work on themselves, and that is something that you can't just. From a how you look perspective, maybe you get a Botox injection or you get your hair dyed, but the true DNA of who am I? What do I stand for? How do I make a meaningful contribution? How do I learn? How do I be a better mother, a better wife, a better leader? Are things that you need to invest time in, and that means, I think, spending time with others in a really deep and meaningful in context.
And last one out of this interview, like, don't you think we should talk more about the conversation of AI that's going to slash and replace a bunch of jobs? I don't really believe that it's going to optimize most people's livelihood. I do believe it's going to optimize only a few people's livelihoods. I think for most humans, they're going to suffer because, like you said, they're not willing to adapt. Even though grit isn't to us humans, like, various things have softened us up in the last decades, and not everyone has the fortune to invest in their own brains, their own health, their own education, right? So I do think it's going to slash a bunch of jobs. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, all disruption comes with fear. When the car was first released on the roads, people used to stand on street corners and shoot rifles in the air to warn people that this thing was coming along the road at 20 kilometers an hour. When electricity was invented, they had people go and provide warnings around its danger. And I think this is obviously a very disruptive technology that's creating a huge amount of fear. And, fear is what drives us as humans. Like what drives you. I don't know whether you've ever gone through a process of trying to unpack the layers of the onion to know what are the fears that are really fueling your ambition in your work. And so it's a very natural human response. But I like to take the positive view and look at what the upside of that is, right? Again, as I said, to create this democratization of knowledge and learning, and that it gives people agency. And, AI has been weaponized against us for so long when you think about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, and it takes our data and makes us addicts to social media. And now we have data that's helping us be effective, be smart, learn faster. I mean, that's amazing. It's AI that's giving us agency. So I think it's too early to say what's going to happen to jobs. For sure, there will be way less recruiters, no doubt, in the next few years. But what other jobs will come to the fore, and what other space will that, empty space will that create in terms of where people take their lives and their careers? So I think the net positive is way more than the negative from how I see people engaging with it.
All right, interesting. I'm going to take the other side of that bet. Barb, where can people find out more about you?
I'm on LinkedIn, not on X, so just follow me on LinkedIn. I blog a fair bit. Would love to hear any provocations around what I've said. I think we live in interesting times, and I feel very privileged to be in this space. It's a very creative journey that we're all on at the moment.
Right. So that was Barb Hyman and Charles Cormier for another Founder Wisdom podcast.